The night was heavy with an oppressive stillness as the woman made her way down the narrow path toward the isolated farm. The world around her was cloaked in darkness, and the only sounds that broke the silence were the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the distant rustling of the wind. As she approached the farmhouse, she saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. His posture was stiff, and his face was shrouded in shadow, but she could feel the weight of his presence. There was no greeting, no words of welcome, only an unsettling silence, one that hinted at the gravity of what she was about to face. The man's eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, and in that brief exchange, she understood that this was no ordinary task. Without a word, he gestured toward the barn, where a horse stood in the dim light. It was a magnificent animal, with sleek, dark fur and eyes that seemed to carry the wisdom of years. The woman felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she realized that this horse, perhaps his most prized possession, was being entrusted to her. But for what purpose? Why was he asking her to take it? And why did his face reveal a sorrow that seemed too deep to articulate? The questions swirled in her mind, but no answers were offered. "Just finish this quickly," the farmer finally spoke, his voice low and almost hollow. The words hung in the air like a final command, a distant plea for closure. There was no explanation, no guidance, only the heavy burden of the task laid out before her. His tone conveyed urgency, a silent understanding that whatever she was about to do could not be delayed. But the request itself was shrouded in mystery, and the lack of details made it all the more chilling. What was the purpose of the journey ahead? Why did it feel like time was running out? The woman stood there for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. She had come here seeking answers, but instead, she was being handed a responsibility that she could barely comprehend. The man's eyes did not waver as he looked at her, his face as emotionless as stone, though his hands trembled slightly as he extended them toward the reins of the horse. It was clear that this was a final act of some kind, but the finality of it left her with an overwhelming sense of foreboding. She didn't have the luxury of time to question further. She had to move, to begin the task that had been set before her. With a hesitant but resolute step forward, she took the reins of the horse from his hands, her fingers brushing against his cold, rough skin. The animal shifted beneath her, sensing the tension in the air. Without another word, she turned and mounted the horse, her mind racing with a million unanswered questions. The path ahead was unknown, the destination a mystery. But as the wind picked up and the sound of the hooves began to echo in the night, she knew that there was no turning back. The farmer's final words echoed in her mind, "Just finish this quickly." The mission had begun, and she could only hope that she was ready for whatever came next. As the woman continued on her journey, the landscape around her seemed to mirror the turmoil brewing inside. The path was long and winding, with the occasional farmhouse or small village dotting the horizon. She had learned little about the farmer, but his silence haunted her. It was clear that the man was not merely a farmer. There was something deeper behind his somber expression and cryptic words. The further she traveled, the more she began to pick up snippets of information from the locals. Whispers of his name seemed to carry a weight of sorrow that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a tragic story, it was a loss that had consumed him completely. One evening, as she passed through a small village, she met an elderly woman at a market stall. The woman had a kind, wrinkled face, but there was a sadness in her eyes when she spoke of the farmer. "He lost everything," the woman said, her voice soft, almost as if speaking the words out of respect for the man who had suffered so much. She told the woman of his wife, a beautiful, vibrant woman who had once filled the house with laughter, and his young daughter, a girl with dreams too big for the small farm. They had both perished in a tragic accident years ago, leaving him to bury his heart along with them. After their deaths, the farmer became a shadow of the man he once was, carrying a grief that no one could understand. As the days passed, the weight of the farmer's sorrow began to sink in. She learned more of his life in the quiet conversations with others along the way. In a tavern, a grizzled traveler shared more details. "The accident took his world away," he muttered. "Some say it broke him, others that he simply gave up on life. But one thing's for sure, he's never been the same since." He didn't speak for months after their deaths, not a single word, just worked the land, day in and day out, without a care in the world. The traveler's words hit the woman like a punch to the stomach. She now understood that her mission was more than a simple errand. She was carrying a symbol of the farmer's final attempt at redemption, a last hope to give meaning to a life that had been consumed by grief. The closer she got to her destination, the more she began to feel the gravity of what she was doing. One evening, while resting in a small quiet cabin, she found a weathered letter tucked in her bag. It wasn't hers. It was from the farmer. The letter, written in shaky handwriting, spoke of his regret, his sorrow, and the love he still had for his lost family. The woman could barely read through the tears that blurred her vision. The letter revealed how the farm, the animals, the land had been his life with them. Now all that was left were the memories, haunting him at every turn. The letter concluded with a heartbreaking plea to never forget what had been lost, to never let go of the love that had shaped him. It was clear now that the mission she carried was a final act of love, a way for him to say goodbye to a past that had chained him for so long. Sarah carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her coat, the weight of its words pressing heavily on her chest. Her mission had transformed from a simple task to a sacred duty. As she realized she wasn't just delivering a horse, she was carrying a piece of the farmer's soul, his final message of love, sorrow, and hope. The journey grew more perilous as she entered the wilderness, the terrain harsh and unforgiving. A group of bandits ambushed her, intent on stealing the horse, and Sarah had to make a split-second decision: fight to protect the mission or risk her life. In the chaos, she realized that she couldn't abandon the horse. It was the symbol of a greater purpose. As Sarah reached the village, the true meaning of her mission became clear. The poverty around her highlighted the gravity of the task she had been given. The horse was not just an animal, it was a symbol of the farmer's lost family, a living memory he couldn't let go of. The family she was delivering the horse to was struggling to survive, and the farmer's gift was not just charity, but a final act of love to ensure their future. Sarah realized the horse was more than a means of survival. It was a way to keep his family's memory alive. This mission wasn't just a task, it was a passing of a legacy, and in that moment Sarah understood the depth of the farmer's sacrifice. She carried his grief, hope, and legacy, and this burden would stay with her forever. As Sarah handed over the reins of the horse to the waiting family, the enormity of the moment settled on her. The family, with wide eyes and trembling hands, could hardly believe what was happening. Their lives, once marked by hardship, seemed to shift with the arrival of the horse. She could see the glimmers of hope in their eyes, but as she watched their gratitude unfold, a deep unspoken loss gripped her. It wasn't just the horse that had changed them, it was the weight of the sacrifice that had brought her here. She watched as the family led the horse into their small barn, their hands caressing its coat as if it were a lifeline. The father, a man with worn features, nodded silently toward her, a gesture that spoke volumes of appreciation. Yet for Sarah, the relief on their faces only deepened the sorrow in her chest. She had given them what they needed, but in doing so she realized she had left behind a piece of herself. The farmer's past had become intertwined with her own, and now, so too did his grief. She had fulfilled his mission, but at what cost? The silence between them was heavy, the unspoken understanding of the sacrifice hanging in the air. Sarah had no words to offer. The raw emotion in her chest made her feel too vulnerable, too exposed. The decision to carry out the mission had been an act of duty, But now, it felt like something far more profound, an exchange of lives, of hope and of loss. As she turned to leave, she realized that true redemption wasn't about grand gestures, it was about small meaningful actions that left lasting impacts. The price of this journey would stay with her forever. As Sarah returned to the farm, the weight of the journey settled heavily on her shoulders. The farm, now eerily quiet, felt like a place where time had stood still. The farmer stood by the barn, his weathered face betraying no emotion, but his eyes spoke volumes. Sarah approached, the reins of the horse now gone, and for the first time, she truly understood the significance of the mission. She had carried his past, his grief and his hope, and now she felt the fullness of her task. The silence between them was thick, yet comforting, as though no words were necessary. With a brief nod, the farmer acknowledged the completion of the mission. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You've given them a future," he said, his voice rough but sincere. His words, simple yet profound, were the final piece of the puzzle.